It is so good to be with you. I have had the privilege of, for the last 20 years, most Mother's Days, I have had the privilege of speaking on a Sunday morning somewhere in the United States that usually requires me to get on an airplane. But I live in Normal, so I drove 1 hour here today. Thank you so much for having me. I want to start in 2 Corinthians 12:9. 2 Corinthians 12:9. Because we're going to look today at challenges we all face. I think that mothers really struggle with what we're going to be talking about today, but honestly, it's not just for moms. And that is the challenges, the imperfections in this world, the imperfections of those we live with, the imperfections in ourselves, the places that we fall short, and what do we do with that? And how does that, particularly for those of us that are moms, cloud our perspective, but also how does that cloud the perspective of all of us? All right, 2 Corinthians 12:9. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Think about those words. For the sake of Christ, I'm content with weaknesses. Can we say that? I'm content with insults, with hardships, with persecutions, and with calamities. And that's the real stuff of life. This morning, I'd like to talk to you about the real stuff of life, the imperfect in your life. You're imperfect, your spouse is imperfect, your kid's imperfect, your coworker's imperfect, your neighbor's imperfect. Let's be honest, we deal with that each and every day. There are no perfect lives, yet there is incredible community found in honesty, and there's freedom found in authenticity. And if you and I will learn how to better handle the imperfect in our lives, then we'll be better friends, better spouses, better moms, better dads, better leaders, better coworkers. For the next few minutes, I'd like for us to ponder 4 questions. 4 questions that I want you to think about, and hopefully you'll even leave here thinking about them even more after we share this morning. And here's the very first question. What if I gave myself and other people the freedom to fail or make mistakes? What if I gave myself and other people the freedom to fail and make mistakes? True story, happened about 20 years ago. My husband and I were planning on a wedding that we were attending at the Mackinac Vineyard. Some of you have probably been out to the Mackinac Winery, and it's a beautiful site for weddings. My husband was officiating the wedding, and our youth pastor was going to be there with his wife. Now, their whole family and our whole family had been invited to this wedding, but Mark and I and Brad and Teresa decided that we were uninviting our children to the wedding because we wanted it to be like a date night. And so we got to the vineyard, and I was looking for Brad and Teresa because we kind of decided, hey, this was going to be like a double date, fun little double date for the 4 of us. And I kept looking for Brad and Teresa to arrive, and they never did, which was really odd. Now, if that had happened today, I would have texted them, there would have been some connection through social media, but texting and social media did not exist at that point. So I knew I was going to see her at church on Sunday, and I thought, you know what? I'll just, I don't know why they're not here. It's really odd. We've been talking about this for months, but, they've got a house full of kids. Somebody puked on the way out the door, I'm quite sure. So I'll just catch her at church on Sunday, since they didn't show up at the wedding on Friday. And so I saw her at church on Sunday in the hallway, and I said, oh, Teresa, where were you guys at the wedding? We so missed you. We thought we were having a double date. And she said, yeah, the wedding, yeah, we were there. I said, no, you weren't there. She said, oh, yeah, we were there. I said, Teresa, it was a really small wedding. I know you weren't there. And she said, oh, yeah, we arrived. We put our gift on the gift table, and we went, and we were seated right when the music was starting. And so then everybody stood up to turn around and look at the bride, and we didn't know who she was. We thought the wedding was on Saturday night, not Friday night. She said, as soon as the bride got to the front, the pastor prayed. We took that as our exit music. And we got up out of our seats. We went and got our gift off of the gift table. And we ran back to the car laughing the whole way. Now, had that happened in today's world, they would have seen the wedding on social media. They would have known their mistake, but back then they did not, and they ended up on the wrong date. Now, if all of our mistakes, all of our imperfect are as innocent as Brad and Teresa's, then it probably wouldn't be such a big deal, but sometimes more is at stake. I picked up the phone. It was one Tuesday afternoon after school. I'd been helping 2 kids with homework. I'd been breaking up a fight between 2 others, and the phone rang. I picked it up, and all I heard on the other end of the line was, Mommy, did you forget me? I did a quick head count. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh my gosh, 1 is missing. Oh, Erica, I'm so sorry. I was helping your brothers with homework, and there's no excuse. I'm so sorry. I will be right there. Oh, okay, Mommy, hurry, please, because I'm the only one here. I was just sick to my stomach. I got in the car and I began to drive across town, and I'm beating myself up the whole way. How in the world does a mother forget one of her children? I obviously have too many, and it's too late to send any of them back. I got there, and she was just sitting on the curb, big tears rolling down her face. I messed up. And there's just no rationalizing it. I made a mistake, and my mistake affected my daughter. And that's probably the hardest part about failing, the fact that we sometimes let others down. And we beat ourselves up. We replay the situation in our head over and over, wishing we could go back and do it again. And every one of us has imperfect moments where guilt wants to creep in. We all make mistakes, and so do the people that we live with. And sometimes we bump up against their mistakes. I remember one particular afternoon. It was the end of a long week, a Thursday afternoon. I had been sick. 3 of the kids had been sick most of the week. It was time for dinner, and I remember standing with the pantry doors open, just wishing something would jump out and make itself. I got a call from my husband. He said, hey, I'm leaving the church. I'm getting ready to head home. And I said, oh, good. Could you just stop at the store for me? I couldn't figure out what I wanted to make for dinner, but could you stop at the store and pick it up? And he said, yeah, absolutely. What do you need? I said, I just need a gallon of milk. That's it. And he said, okay, all right, no problem. So 30 minutes goes by, he walks in the door, empty-handed. I said, oh, babe, where's the milk? He said, oh, man, somebody called the church just as I was leaving. They were in crisis. I talked to them. I thought about it the whole way home. I completely forgot. I said, Mark, you have ruined my perfect plan for cereal for dinner. Milk is spilled and messes are made. Promises are broken. Most of us would say, I don't expect myself to be perfect. I don't expect my kids to be perfect. I don't expect my spouse to be perfect. But the truth is, when imperfect shows up, we often don't handle it well. And that's why I believe that we all struggle with the perfection infection. And particularly for moms, this is big, and it's part of what steals our joy as mothers. And even if you're not a mother, it's part of what steals joy in life. What if we were okay with making mistakes? Now, I'm not talking about sinning. I'm not talking about walking away from God's truth. I'm talking about just the imperfect parts of life. I'm talking about the stuff on this side of heaven that we are going to mess up and somebody else is going to mess up, and we're going to have to deal with that in some way. But what if we were actually okay with making mistakes? What if we settled it in our heart that failure is a normal part of life? And what if we could respond with love and grace instead of shame and anger? You see, I believe that the perfection infection is all around us. It's everywhere, and we don't even realize it. But we scroll through social media, and what we do is we see other people's highlight reels while we know our behind-the-scene reels. We don't even recognize we're doing it. Or we're in the checkout line at the grocery store. Those mothers in the audience, you'll really appreciate this. You know, there's a picture on the front of a magazine in the checkout line, and it says, body after baby, 3 months. With this super skinny celebrity. And we look down and go, body after baby, 3 years, 33 years, never looked like that. Guess why? Because she didn't look like that either. I had the privilege, about 20 years ago, I had the privilege of being on the cover of Today's Christian Woman magazine. I remember getting the magazine in my mailbox, bringing it inside, and standing next to the mirror with the magazine, smiling, going, oh yeah, my teeth aren't that white. Even on the front of a Christian magazine, they had photoshopped it. You see, we're being fed that, and without realizing it, the perfection infection invades our life, and we feel less than. And we feel like we're not measuring up. The perfection infection happens from our culture. Maybe it even happened in our childhood. You came home in 4th grade and you were super excited because you had worked so hard for these grades. You had 5 A's and 1 B. And you brought it home and you showed it to mom and dad. And one of them said, wow, check it out. This is great. But how come this one isn't an A? And in that moment, you were infected with a perfection infection. Now, they were just trying to spur you on to do your best. They didn't intend that. But your heart, your little tender heart in that moment began to realize that good isn't good enough. I'm expected to be perfect. You see, when we expect perfection in ourselves and in others, we're setting ourselves up for perpetual disappointment, discouragement, and disillusionment. And we become bound up in chains of perfection instead of being free in authenticity. However, if we expect mistakes and failures to occasionally happen, we won't be so disappointed when they show up. And that takes us to another what if question. What if I actually had realistic expectations of myself and others? What if I actually had realistic expectations of myself and others? When the perfection infection closes in on us, we have unrealistic expectations of ourselves and others. And I don't think that we should lower them as much as I think they should better match reality. For instance, expect yourself to make mistakes on occasion. You are human, after all. Expect your spouse to make mistakes if you're married. Expect teammates at work to occasionally make mistakes. If you have kids, expect responsibility, expect obedience, and expect them to fail at both. Oh, wait a minute. We got the responsibility and the obedience piece, but the failure piece? You know, several years ago, I co-authored a book called Got Teens, Time-Tested Answers for Moms of Teens and Tweens. I co-authored it with my friend Pam Farrell. Between the two of us, we had 6 teenagers, plenty of illustrations. And we changed the names to protect the guilty. And when we were doing research for that book, I ran across a really powerful statement in a piece of research. And it simply said this: the brain optimally grows in failure. The brain optimally grows in failure. That means the brain grows best in failure. I want you to think about that our God designed us in such a way that even the failure parts of our life have something good because they allow our brain to grow. So for those of you that are parents and you're going to leave this place and you're going to go home, and I promise you're going to run into your child's imperfect before you're in the car. And I want you to just simply look at them and say, I know what's happening. Your brain is growing. If you expect imperfection, you won't be so disappointed when it shows up, and it will show up. And some of our expectations are fueled by cultural expectations. Take my friend Deanne, for example. Deanne was, it was a Valentine's Day, and Deanne and her husband, they always just did a simple Valentine's celebration. They just bought each other cards, and they would exchange their cards at breakfast on Valentine's morning. That's all they'd ever done. So that happened this particular Valentine's Day, and when her husband left for work and the kids left for school, Deanne decided she was going to get on to onto her Facebook page, just spend a little bit of time there. And when she did, she saw this. She saw this picture, flowers, lots and lots of flowers. And suddenly, her card wasn't looking so good. She saw people that said, oh, look what my husband sent me to work. And it's a picture of flowers on her desk at work. Oh, look what was waiting on the kitchen counter when I woke up. And it was pictures of flowers. And her little measly card was looking just a little weak. By the time that evening rolled around, she was feeling anything but romantic towards her husband because she didn't get flowers. Fast forward 3 days. She and her husband awakened to the sound no parent wants to hear at 3 a.m., the sound of a child puking. They jump out of bed. They assume their positions because they have done this before. She cleans up the kid, and he cleans up the bed, the walls, the carpet, and whatever else got hit along the way. She's cleaning up her son. She gets fresh jammies on him, and she gets him out of the bathtub, gets his jammies on, and says, all right, let's get you back to bed. I think Dad's got your bed made again. And they go out the door and make a turn to go back to the bedroom, and that's when she sees her husband on his hands and knees scrubbing puke out of the carpet. And suddenly her heart is convicted. Oh God, I'm so sorry. I would far rather have a man that cleans up puke at 3 a.m. than sends me flowers on Valentine's Day. Sometimes we just need a little perspective to adjust those expectations. So what if we looked at interruptions during the day as evidence of being needed instead of frustrations to be dealt with? What if we looked at our real spouse, for those of us that are married, and celebrated who they are instead of criticizing who they aren't? What if we looked at our toy-strewn family room as a visual aid illustrating happy, creative, playing children instead of a cluttered mess we can't keep under control? What if we understood that all marriages have moments where they don't feel happily ever after, and it's okay to seek help in hard seasons? The Bible tells us, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. What if we actually did that with our expectations? Think about this. If we expect life to be imperfect, messy, and sometimes challenging, we won't hide our reality from others because we won't feel as if we failed. And that brings us to the next what if question. What if I took off my mask and I was honest with others? What if I took off my mask and I was honest with others? You see, we perpetuate the perfection infection ourselves without even realizing it. When somebody says, hey, how you doing? And we go, fine. Knowing very well you are not fine. Or when we sit across having coffee with someone and they're kind of pouring their life out and we're quiet. And we don't share the real stuff that's going on in our life because we're afraid. We need to begin to take the masks off. Because here's what happens. We naturally have a tendency to compare. But when we compare, what we do is we compare our insides to other people's outsides. And when we do that, we come up with wrong conclusions. Let me see if I can illustrate this for you. This picture is a picture of my family. It's a good picture. Everybody's smiling. We are color coordinated. If I share that picture with you and then just move on, you will naturally compare the insides of your family to the outsides of my family. And in doing so, I promise you, you would come up with some wrong conclusions. Several years ago, I wrote the book, No More Perfect Moms, which followed with No More Perfect Kids and then No More Perfect Marriages. And in doing so, I started talking more and more about the perfection infection and kicking it out of our life. And so I went to each of my kids and my husband and I said, hey, if I could share something, a real life struggle of yours, what would you be comfortable with me sharing? And each of them gave me permission to share with you what I will share. So this next picture is a picture of our daughter Anne and her husband Matt. And Matt, nope, that's not it. Keep going back. There we go. Yep, there we go. So this is Anne and Matt, and Anne is our oldest. This is our grandchildren, Rylan and Landon. And you look at that picture, it's a good picture. And they're a happy family. Matt and Ann have been married 15 years. Matt's a youth pastor over at Eastview Christian Church in Bloomington. And they look good, and they are. They're doing well in life. But what that picture doesn't tell you is of their 15 years that they've been married, they've spent about 6 years in marriage counseling. Not because their marriage was like on the rocks, but it was because they grew up in very different home environments and they knew they needed help to begin to blend them into one family. Not only that, but Anne has struggled with depression and anxiety in huge ways. This next picture is a picture of our daughter Erica and her husband Kendall and our granddaughter Marie. And again, you look at that picture and it's a good picture. But what that picture doesn't tell you is, number one, Erica and Kendall, they got married when they were 18. They were both right out of high school. We told them we didn't think that was a good idea. They told us they did think it was a good idea. So once we said our piece, they went ahead and went through with it. And you know what? They've done just fine. They've been married 11 years. And Kendall went right into the Army. Went into the Army, had his first deployment into Iraq, came home with his faith intact, had a second deployment into Afghanistan, came home with his faith in shreds. And it breaks my heart that our granddaughter is not being raised in a Christian home. That's so hard. Some of you mamas understand that. This picture of Erica was when she was a baby. Erica was super colicky. Some of you are in that stage of life. This is not what she looked like very often. This next picture is what she looked like. That was our life for 6 months. I mean, the look on her brother and sister's face is like, when does this stop? Let me tell you, she cried for 6 months and I cried for 6 months. It was rough. This next picture is a picture of our son, our 3 sons. Our son Evan, there in the middle, is our only one that's not living in the area. He lives in Australia. We had the opportunity to go visit him right before the world shut down 2 years ago, thankfully. But Evan, incredible musician. He was a worship pastor for quite some time, both in Bloomington and in Chicago. He was married to a beautiful woman. They went through a divorce, and he announced to the world that he was gay. Not what I thought my mothering experience was going to look like. And now we walk out love and truth and grace and love and truth and grace. It's taught me to love at an even deeper level. So challenging at times. This next picture is our son, Austin. Austin's our youngest, and his wife, Larissa. And Austin, very successful businessman right now. He runs his own content marketing company, but I got to tell you a story of Austin. When he was 7th grade, I got a call from the teacher. 7th grade. Mrs. Savage, are you aware that Austin has 87 missing assignments? 87? Why didn't you call me at 20? We found out that he had horrible ADHD. He didn't really have the hyperactive part. He just had the lack of focus part. And so we began to deal with that. You want to know what's really funny? Of my 5 kids, my kid with the 87 missing assignments, he's the only one that's graduated from college. See, some of you are there. You are there. And you're going, is there hope for this kid? I want you to know there is. So Austin and his wife, Larissa, they have 3 children. They actually became foster parents here in the Peoria system 2 years ago. And so their 2 oldest are foster children. And then they had little Willa as well. And we're just so grateful. But that was hard getting there. This next picture is our boys again. And I think maybe, I'm sorry. There we go, yeah. And so you've met Evan, you've met Austin there on the right, but Nikolai there on the left. So Nikolai is actually the newest member of our family. We adopted him from Russia when he was 9 years old. And he melded right into our family very easily at 9 and 10 and 11 and 12. But when he hit 15 and 16 and 17, something called mental illness entered our home and our family. He had his first suicide attempt at the age of 17, and there have been 5 more over the last 10 years. Has been a really challenging journey. Nobody expects to visit their child in the psych ward, the hospital, but we have done that many a times. Not only that, but Nikolai has fathered 2 children. One, little Gabby. And when little Gabby was born, this next picture is my sister. She stepped up at the age of 49 and said, I want to adopt her. So that means we have a grandbaby niece. Let me tell you, life on this side of heaven is messy. And then there's my husband and I. This is a picture of Mark and I. We introduce ourselves when we teach on marriage. We introduce ourselves as we've been married 39 years, 29 of them happily. And while I wish that wasn't the truth, it is. And it wasn't that there were 10 hard years. There were hard seasons that were 6 months or a year or 2 years. And then it would even out. We would get some help and then it would get hard again. Mark has dealt with depression for much of his life and he really struggled with that. And that contributed to some of those challenges at times. But 10 years ago, actually, it was 11 years ago. He left pastoring, and we had no idea how much his identity was wrapped up in his in the role of being a pastor. And I saw him begin to spiral like I'd never seen before. And as he spiraled, I saw a darkness settle in on him. It was darker than I'd ever seen before. And in the midst of that, I found out he had been unfaithful. I never thought that would be a part of our story. It was a dark year, a very long, dark year. Eventually, he left to pursue the other relationship. And I knew if he would return to his God, he would return to his family. And it took a year. But on Easter Sunday of 2012, he had his own personal resurrection. I saw him literally do a U-turn, and I saw the scales just fall off of his eyes, and we began to then put the wheels back on the bus. It was not easy. It was a year and a half of weekly marriage counseling In fact, our counselor was here in Peoria, so we would drive an hour from Bloomington. We would go to counseling. We would drive an hour home. But I'm so grateful. God took our pain and turned it into his purposes. I'm so grateful that now our ministry is primarily a marriage ministry, and we specialize in helping couples overcome infidelity. God often takes our messes and turns them into our messages. And I'm so grateful for that. And then this last picture is a picture of me 9 years ago when I was fighting breast cancer. I had chemo, radiation, surgery. Thankfully, I am now cancer-free. So grateful for that. But here's what I want you to know. Now, when you look at that picture of my family, do you see it differently? Because now you compare the insides of your family to some of the insides of my family, and we're not so different after all, right? And what I found is when we take off our masks, it invites others to take off their masks as well. We can be honest because we know that he who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it. In other words, we're in process. And that brings us to the last question I just want to invite you to think about as we finish up. What if I replaced being perfect with being perfected? You see, the imperfect parts of our lives are counterbalanced with the reality of a perfect God who longs to shine his light through the cracks in our lives. God can do his best work through our imperfections if we'll let him. Remember that verse that we started with in 2 Corinthians. When we are weak, we are strong. And that's because when we are weak, that is when Jesus' light shines through the cracks in our lives. God is the potter and we are the clay. And when a potter is sculpting a clay pot, it changes as he works on it or she works on it. And that's what I want you to understand is that God is changing and molding us and perfecting us to become more like Jesus every day. When we accept the reality of our real but messy life, we begin to understand that mistakes grow us. They mature us. They increase our compassion. They decrease our judgment. And that's what happens when we allow God to perfect us. He takes our messes and turns them into his messages. And sometimes that's for us. Sometimes that's for others. Remember when I forgot my daughter? And I pulled up and there she was sitting on the curb and the tears were coming down her face. And I got out of the car and I walked over to her and I gave her a big hug and I said, "Oh, Erica, I am so sorry. Will you please forgive me?" And in that moment, God used my mess for a message for my girl. This is what you do when you mess up. You own it, you apologize, and you ask for forgiveness. If we are pursuing perfect and imperfect happens, we often respond with anger and shame and unforgiveness. But here's the deal. If we are pursuing the perfecting process, in other words, we know we're in process, we know those that we love and that we live with are in process, we can respond in some different ways. I want to give you just real quick 6 of those. We can respond in these antidotes for the perfection infection. The first one is courage. Courage takes the mask off. And then there's confidence. We can be confident in knowing who we are in Christ. Grace. Sometimes we need to give grace to those around us, to give them the grace space to be human and to not get raked over the coals for every little thing they do different or wrong. Humility says, hey, I make mistakes. It's okay. We all make mistakes on this side of heaven. Love. We can love deeper. During that dark season of my marriage, God taught me to love in deeper ways because I'd always loved somebody that loved me. He wasn't being loving, but God taught me how to love anyway. We can learn how to do that. And then forgiveness. Do you know that by the end of today, you will have the opportunity to practice any of those multiple times a day? That forgiveness one, I would say it's the most underused antidote that you have. You probably need to be forgiving somewhere around 12 or more times a day when you bump into somebody's imperfect. These are Christ-like responses, and they are the antidotes to the perfection infection. They allow for failure. They break the chains of unrealistic expectations. They embrace authenticity, and they acknowledge we're all in the perfecting process. So we asked ourselves 4 questions. What if I gave myself and other people the freedom to fail or make mistakes? And what if I actually had realistic expectations of myself and others? And what if I took off my mask and I was honest with others? And what if I replaced being perfect with being perfected? I believe we'd find contentment. We'd embrace who we are instead of being critical of who we are not. I believe we'd discover we're not as alone as we sometimes think we are. I think we'd also find freedom, a freedom we long for. The freedom found in authenticity, and as we embrace being perfected, a freedom found in Jesus Christ. And finally, I believe we'd find hope. Hope during hard seasons, and hope found in the God of second chances, who takes our failures and redeems them for his good. Lord Jesus, we are just so grateful. We are so grateful for this opportunity to be reminded that you take the broken parts of our life and you shine your light through them. I pray, Father God, that the places where joy was being robbed because of comparison, that today that perspective has been changed. That we would be able to look at others and to say to ourselves, they have pain in their life. They have a backstory I don't know, and that will pull us back from that ledge of comparison and plant us on the firm foundation of reality of this side of heaven. It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen.